There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Shawn of Shawn Breathes Books. Welcome back to my channel, and this is a discussion I'm very excited to embark upon with one of my favorite subscribers and patrons on Patreon, Alina, joining us from Rotterdam. Hello, Alina.
Hello, Shawn. Good to be here. I'm excited for this conversation.
Well, and you've outdone me in the blouse department today, so I'm feeling
Yeah.
underdone. We are here to have a pseudo buddy read style discussion on Audrey Magee's novel Colony, which was a Booker long-listed novel published in 2022.
Yeah.
And Alina is one of my top-tier patrons, bibliophile bestie, and one of the benefits that those patrons have is that they can do a buddy read with me if they wish. And so that's why we're here. And what a delight to be chatting about a book in depth with Alina. So I'll say at the outset that this will be a spoiler-free discussion, and later, if we decide that we're going to get into any spoilers, you will be amply warned so that you won't be surprised. You can decide at that time. I will say something like, we're going into spoiler territory now, so if you want to stop listening, go read the book and come back. And if I don't say that, you can rest assured that we're not going to talk about spoilers. So, Alina,
Yes.
give me your hot take or your general impression of the novel.
I thought it was a very good book, a very interesting book. It was very much into what does it mean to be a part of a community, and what the others expect from that community, and what do they bring in, and stuff like that. I really liked it. I thought it was also it was not a warm book, if you know what I mean. It's not all cozy and stuff like that. You could think it's almost nonfiction in the style of writing. It's not flowery. It's not definitely not in the beginning. You don't feel any feelings. You don't have any much feelings for the characters. Let's put it that way.
Okay, good. Well, yeah, I enjoyed it. I didn't love it, but I'm glad I read it. It held my interest. In a minute, I'm going to give kind of a summary of the book so that people will understand the discussion, a non-spoilery summary. But I found the stuff about Irish history and the Irish language interesting, even though I didn't think it was necessarily well integrated into the novel. It was kind of an info dumpy style of presentation for me, but I still found it interesting. So that's not much of a criticism if I still enjoyed it, and I did that. All that information, that was fascinating. Um, I agree with you that the characters were not warm, and that I did get invested in one or two of the characters. Absolutely, and we'll talk about that at length, I'm sure. Overall, I didn't quite see that it was a Booker-worthy novel, but it was a novel worth reading for me. So maybe that will be my first thoughts. So let me try to give a little summary so that our subsequent discussions will make sense. So the novel opens with a man named Lloyd, or Mr. Lloyd. He's an English artist. The setting is 1979, and he is going to stay on a remote Irish island for the purposes of doing some painting out there. And he doesn't speak Irish or Gaelic, and he is kind of an arrogant jerk. And there's a certain nuance to his character, but I would say mostly he comes off as off-putting. And the residents of the island that is most drawn to him is a young guy. I don't know, how old would you say? Is about 18 or?
No, he's younger, but he's still at school. So I would think 15 or 16, something like that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm terrible with people's ages. So anyways,
I don't remember, but I would not say he's 18 because he's still at
18.
school and he doesn't want to go back to school.
Right. And he is interested in art and interested in anything that might get him off the island. The other people on the island, his mother and grandmother and great-grandmother, don't warm to Mr. Lloyd necessarily, or at least not right away. And certainly the men on the island are quite suspicious of him. A little bit later, a French linguist named JP, let's just call him JP. He's been to the island to do linguistic research summer after summer after summer, and he's writing a book about the preservation or the endangerment of the Gaelic language. And he really resents that this English artist is there because people are speaking English to the English artist, and his whole point is he wants to save Gaelic from the encroachment of English, and so that all that political linguistic stuff is a huge part of the story. And the last thing I'll say, by way of general summary, is that interleaved between the longer chapters are short paragraph-long reports of violent incidents to do with the Troubles. And it's written very condensed, almost like a newspaper article. And so that is threaded through the novel, or I would say there's an attempt to thread it through the novel in that. Well, it didn't really work for me, but that's another part of the novel. Did I miss anything, Alina, in terms of giving kind of an introductory summary?
No, and it all happens in one summer.
It all happens in one summer, absolutely.
There are a couple more on the island, but not many. And they are usually either old men or women, and there are almost no young people on the island. And I think it's important to know that James' father passed away, drowned while fishing. And a lot of men die because fishing.
a lot of the men on the island have been killed in boating or drowned. Fishing is the livelihood, or has been. And I would add to that and I don't think it's a spoiler to say that. So James's mother is Mairead, and Mairead, in one fishing accident, lost her father, her husband,
her brother, I think,
and her brother.
Yeah.
She's a young widow, and that grief permeates the story as well.
Yeah.
So where do we want to go with this? Why don't I ask you, so which character did you like the best or get the most invested in?
I loved James. I love James. He was such a character. If I have to choose one, I will choose James, and otherwise, and his mother, Merritt, because she's a very important, and she's also a very interesting character.
Absolutely. I would rank that, have the same ranking as you. I didn't really feel that many of the other characters came alive, jumped off the page, or had enough nuance to hold my interest. But I thought those two characters, particularly James, I just adored him. Yeah. He was young and innocent, but he also had an innate wisdom, and he was sassy.
Yeah,
which I really appreciated.
Yeah. I thought he was naive, but not naive. He was curious, and at the same time trusting. And he was just a lovely boy. He's a very nice character. Yeah. And the point is, I think, for the other characters, let's put it that way, and especially JP, which is the French linguist, and Mr. What's his name?
Lloyd.
And Mr. Lloyd, I think they are more either really portrayed as stereotypes. They were not flesh and blood, and neither of them, but they were a stereotype of something that was happening at that time. I mean, or maybe still, but definitely two poles of the same story, I thought. But
yeah, I think that Mr. Lloyd was arrogant. He wasn't particularly political, so he didn't have a particularly imperialist politics about him. But he also just felt that people should speak English with him because he didn't speak Gaelic, and was a bit of a jerk about things like that. His character was kind of developed, but I guess one of the things that I didn't like about the novel was that both of those men, Lloyd and JP, they were given backstories that, while those backstories were interesting, they didn't quite compensate for the fact that their characters that summer in Ireland didn't really come alive for me. So
Yeah, I agree with you. I found JP, I mean, in certain ways, they are both, I thought they were both very neo-colonials. I mean, they were all, both of them trying to capture something and keep it there. You know, it must not change because I don't want it to change. The one with the language, and the other with how this lonely island on the beach, how it looks and what it's expected of it. And it's not supposed to be a modern place, but it's supposed to be set in a certain time. And they were both doing the same thing, only in a different way of portraying it. By the that's how I read it.
I think that is spot on, and I think that the backstory about each of them is meant to show why they had that agenda or why that was important to them.
Yeah.
And I think it did explain it. So, for example, JP was the biracial child of a French man and an Algerian woman, and his mother wanted him to learn Arabic, and he didn't want to learn Arabic as a kid. He wanted to fit in with the French boys, and he's kind of compensating for that by wanting to rescue Gaelic from the imperialist English. And that was interesting, but I just felt it didn't quite fit in. It seemed like kind of extra stuff for me that didn't necessarily need to be there. I would have been
I,
more interested in a more fleshed out portrayal of those two men as characters on the island than I was interested in their backstory. That's me, maybe.
I can feel that. I mean, I wasn't really interested in them much as definitely those, especially the Arabic place. I didn't like it. I thought in certain way, Mr. Lloyd was more. I mean, he was such a snob. He was only thinking about himself, but at least he had something like. I mean, the first chapter I thought was very funny in the way he crosses the. He wants to cross not
Small little boat.
in a small boat full of water. Yeah, I thought it was funny, and when you after a while you find yourself thinking, or I found myself thinking, he wants to be the Gauguin of 1979 Irish Island or something like that. The English Gauguin who goes to this unspoiled
The colonies.
Yeah, and every scene he gave it a title.
Yes. And it was set out as almost like poetry. Like there were line breaks when
Yeah.
he would everything or many of the things that he encountered on the island he did sketch or paint, but everything else he experienced as if it was a potential work of art that he would give a title to.
Yeah.
That kind of worked for me. I think it worked for me
I
because the audiobook did it
Yeah.
well too.
I thought that part was quite well done. It made it interesting. At least it's a way of describing a person's way of looking at something as only art, and for that part, not caring about the people
Right.
because he made a lot of promises. He promised the man that he was not going to. No, he promised the great grandmother. Anyway, he promised the island that he was not going to picture any people. He was only going to paint the cliffs, the birds, the crowds, the sea, but he was not going to paint the people. He broke that promise immediately.
In the first 5 pages of the novel, absolutely. So two things that are a little bit contradictory, but let's see what happens when I try to put them together. One is that I really enjoyed reading about the art making. I thought that was really well described, and it was very interesting to me. I think somebody who's not particularly into art might find that boring. Some of the Goodreads reviews I read, they didn't so much talk about the art making, but they said, "Oh my God, all these characters did was drink tea." The stuff about art history, I found that really well done and interesting. At the same time, maybe my biggest criticism of the novel is that it really was too on the nose. Like I wanted a bit more subtlety, and I just felt there were themes of imperialism, colonialism, and how that could surface, or how that could be that there was an artistic dimension of those political things through the art. It was just a bit too strident or literal for me. But I didn't get bored, but I thought a little more subtlety on about those points. It would have been more effective. It would have been more powerful for me.
Yeah, so I said it in the beginning. It's a novel. It's definitely a novel because the style of writing is not novelesque. Is that a word? It's
Novelistic, maybe novelistic. Yeah,
it's more like putting facts together, and that's what we are being told.
I think especially the JP sections.
Yeah, the JP sections definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
There's some lovely writing about the art making, especially from Mairead's perspective and from James's perspective, that I think is quite lovely writing. But when it's JP's research is kind of given to us, is kind of dumped on the page, and again, I learned a lot from it. But
what I found interesting in the JP story was how much he was criticizing the British and so Mr. Lloyd, but he's doing the same thing. He's also using the population for his own goals. I mean, he wants to be he's writing his thesis, so it has to you know so
for very kind of conflicting personal reasons to do with his own
yeah,
origin. Yes.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
one of the things that came out of all that, he was a bit pompous and rigid, was that people that did speak English didn't want to speak English in front of him, the Islanders, and I thought that was really funny.
I thought the Islanders, when they were as a group, when they were not with either of the two outsiders, they were so funny. The way
Yes,
they were talking about things,
absolutely.
that I thought that was when they were in a group and they were just criticizing those two men or not even criticizing, just discussing them. I thought that part was quite fun. How they
Yeah.
looked at them, both of them. I thought the interesting thing was from the point of view of, can you stop change? Whatever, if it's good or bad, that's another. But can you stop it? Can you? Everybody's trying it, and at the same time, and that's what I think those news reports came in, was that you suddenly, when the story goes on, you realize that they are listening to this. So they are not completely not knowing what's happening in the world. They have a radio, they do listen to the news, they read the papers, they are having an opinion about the situations in a different part of Ireland. But that kind of thing I thought was, yeah, I thought that was quite well done. More and more, it's not just, but it gets into the story too.
I had a different, not as positive an experience with that, but I guess I kept thinking to myself, when people are getting killed over uh, colonization, I think the linguistic survival of the language is kind of, for me, would be on the back burner if I was
True.
writing the book. And it was very much on the front burner. And then the killings were just these little press reports. And I absolutely agree that later in the novel, the characters on the island, especially the Irish characters, they do start to talk about it and disagree about it. And it comes into their lives, or we're shown how much they're talking about it. And that was
Yeah.
interesting. But I don't know. I understand why people want to preserve language, but when people are dying on the street, I'm not sure that the preserving the languages would be the first priority.
No,
I don't
I
know.
agree with you on that part. I mean, that's why I think at least JP and Mr. Lloyd were not, at least in a certain way, they were both out of this. I mean, they were just being that they're being doing what they want to do, and they are not caring about the others. What would happen to them? I mean, all the time, JP keeps calling James, which wants to be called James. He keeps calling him James or the Irish, and every time James tells him, "No, I'm called James," and still, because of his own thing, I mean, because he wants this, he keeps calling the boy, and calling a person by a name is very
Yeah.
important. It's part of your identity. He's denying it because of something he wants, and not because he's listening to what the boy wants. So in certain way, he's just busy with his thesis, and the other one is just busy with being a kind of a Gauguin in the modern time, or whatever. They are not involved in because even when it starts getting political, and Lloyd says to JP, yeah, but you did the same in Algeria. They don't go into they are just saying things, but they are not fighting, or they are not feeling it.
Yeah, they're not representing the conflict on the main.
No.
It's not the mainland, but the main island of Ireland. They're not spokespeople for that or supporting that. But we both were fascinated by Mairead, so let's talk about her for a few minutes. So
Yeah.
why was Mairead so fascinating to you, Alina?
Because first of all, Mairead is not she's young, but she's not a child like James. And more you find out that Mairead would have wanted to leave the island. She wanted to change. At least she saw the possibilities of change. She wanted to have a different life. She was the only one in certain way in that would give James the possibility. Even if she's going to lose him, all of the other islanders are thinking that is not right. You have to become and Mairead is the only one who is going to lose her son, because she's not going to leave the island. But she knows that this is his only possibility to have a different life. So I thought she was maybe the most aware of things and lost at the same time. I mean, she's still waiting for her husband to come back from sea.
And yeah, and that drowning had been. Do you remember, or are we told how many years ago? But it's like 10 years ago or something.
Yeah, long, at least.
So the
I think James was a little boy. I think
little boy.
so 10 years, whatever, they are dead. I mean, that's definitely. But for her, it has no ending because she never got something back
Right.
from the sea.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of grief, it makes sense psychologically
Yeah,
that can
yeah.
happen. Absolutely. And yet she hasn't let that hold her back from getting into different kinds of relationships
Yeah.
with men. We'll leave it at that. But she's no frigid widow, if I can
No,
put it that way.
she's very sensual.
Very sensual.
Yeah, and in everything, in the way she touches the paint, or when she watches a book of painting, she has dreams, or she had dreams. She's not a prude, so she has relationships. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and we'll let the people discover the
Yeah,
details
yeah.
of that for themselves. But that was an interesting part. And I think we can talk about the fact that eventually Mr. Lloyd paints her, and paints her in semi-nude. Maybe there's more than semi-nude. You can discover it when you read it, but at least it starts out with semi-nude posing. So for me, that was a kind of suspenseful thing, because there is a
Hmm.
level of prudery and conservatism among the men of the island that if
Yeah.
they ever found out that it could have been an explosive situation, you'll have to read the book to find out if it did explode. But that was a tension in the novel that I found interesting. We get deep into her consciousness about why she's wanting to be painted. And that would be another example of as fascinating as I found her character, her ruminations they weren't subtle enough for me. Like, she talked about, I want to get off the island, at least in this painting. It's like, you're don't tell me that, show me that. Like, it was just too direct for this particular reader.
Yeah, but I think because it was such a sparse, I mean, there was not much, you could not show a lot. You had to tell quite a lot, because there was not. I mean, I've been to Ireland. I've been to one of these small islands off the coast of Ireland, to I think the Aran Islands or something like that. And they are, I don't think it's based on one of them, maybe well, but they are empty. There are goats, a lot of birds and stuff like that. And there are stones and small, I'm not even going to call it a village, but let's put it where people live. And that's it. And they live where the boat comes in. So the boat comes in, and that's where the people are, and they are knitting, and you can buy your errand shirts or sweaters or something. But it's empty. I was only there for a day, and gorgeous, but it was misty. The fog was hanging over this island. It was, in a certain way, it's not a place where you can hide in between everything. Everybody knows everything. Also in this book, it turns out that everybody knows everything, and if they don't, they will find out the things they know. You understand what I mean? It's more like because of the sparseness of the place and the people that live there, they are not, and everybody's related, I think, in a way.
Probably.
I think they are probably somehow related. Francis is James' uncle, the brother of the father who died, who drowned.
Yes.
And he doesn't live on the island, or the men come and go with their boat or whatever you call it, up and down to the coast. They bring the supplies, and they bring stuff over. And Francis is also interested in Merritt.
Yeah, we learned that very early, that she doesn't seem the slightest bit interested in him, and he's biding his time, expecting to win her over eventually. But he's been waiting a long time, and not much seems to be happening there. So, yeah, absolutely. And we find out more about his character and his beliefs at the end of the novel that were interesting to read about as well.
Yeah.
Well, I think maybe we should wrap up. I think we've given the viewers a sense of what they're in for with this novel without spoiling a darn thing. I'm glad I read it. I didn't enjoy it maybe quite as well as Alina did. So you've got two different perspectives on it. And Alina, thanks for such a wonderful chat.
Thank you, Shawn.